The earthquake alarm pierced through my bedroom at exactly 3:47 a.m., just as I remembered it would. I sat up in bed, my heart racing not from the shrill warning, but from the vivid memories flooding back. The crumbling concrete, Jake's hand pushing me forward, the sickening crack of the riverside bridge collapsing beneath my feet, the icy water rushing up to claim me while my beloved cousin stood safely on solid ground, watching me drown. But that was 3 days from now. Today was September 15th, 2023. I was alive, breathing, and most importantly, I knew what was coming. My phone buzzed with the first of many calls I'd receive over the next 72 hours. Jake's name flashed on the screen, and I almost smiled at the irony. In my previous life, I'd answered immediately, grateful for his concern, trusting his every word about evacuation routes and safety procedures. This time, I let it ring. "Lily!" Jake's voice burst through my voicemail, perfectly mimicking the worried tone I remembered. "Did you feel that tremor? The news says there might be aftershocks. I'm coming to get you. We need to evacuate together. Family sticks together, right?" Family? The word tasted bitter now. In my first life, I'd believed that. Completely. Jake was Uncle Richard's son, 3 years older, the golden boy who'd always protected his clumsy little cousin. When our parents died in that car accident 5 years ago, Jake had been my rock, helping me navigate insurance claims and funeral arrangements. He'd even moved back to our hometown to keep an eye on me. What a fool I'd been. I walked to my kitchen window and pulled back the curtains. There was Jake's silver Honda parked across the street, engine running, exhaust visible in the cool morning air. He'd arrived within minutes of the first tremor, just like before, so punctual, so prepared. My phone rang again. This time, I answered. "Jake, thank God you called." I let my voice tremble slightly, playing the role of the frightened, dependent cousin he expected. "I'm so scared. What should I do?" "Don't worry, sweetheart. I'm right outside. Pack light, just essentials. The evacuation centre downtown might get crowded, but I know a better route through the old bridge. Riverside Bridge is shorter and fewer people use it." Riverside Bridge. There it was, the death trap he'd led me to before, disguised as salvation. "Are you sure it's safe?" I asked, remembering how I'd questioned him the first time. His answer would be identical. "Trust me, Lily. Have I ever steered you wrong?" I researched all the evacuation routes. The main highways would be packed, but Riverside Bridge can handle the load. It was just inspected last month. Lie. The bridge inspection had been delayed for 6 months due to budget cuts, a fact Jake knew perfectly well since he worked for the city planning department. He'd seen the internal memos about structural concerns. He'd also seen my inheritance paperwork from Grandma's estate, the $2.3 million that would pass to him as my next of kin if I died unmarried and childless. "Okay," I said softly. "I'll pack now." "How long do I have?" "The seismic activity is getting stronger. We should leave within the hour. I'll wait for you." I hung up and immediately called my lawyer, Martin Webb. He answered on the second ring, his voice groggy but alert. "Lily, it's almost 4 a.m. Martin, I need you to file an emergency codicil to my will. Today, before noon." "A codicil? What kind of changes?" "I want to leave everything to the Riverside Animal Shelter. Every penny. If I die unmarried, Jake gets nothing." There was a pause. "Lily, are you feeling all right? This is very sudden." "I'm fine. Just, I had a dream about dying, and it made me think about my priorities. Animals need protection more than humans do." I looked out the window where Jake was checking his watch impatiently. "Can you have the paperwork ready by 10 a.m? "I'll try, but it's urgent, Martin. Life or death urgent." After hanging up, I began my performance. I packed a small bag with trembling hands, making sure Jake could see me moving around through the lit windows. I grabbed my grandmother's jewellery box, not because I needed it, but because Jake expected me to take sentimental items. I also slipped my phone charger and emergency cash into my jacket pocket. When I emerged from my house 20 minutes later, Jake was waiting beside his car with the engine running and a concerned expression that looked genuine to anyone who didn't know better. He rushed to take my bag, his hand briefly touching mine. "You're shaking," he said, his voice soft with fake sympathy. "Don't worry, cousin. I'll get you somewhere safe." "Thank you," I whispered, allowing the tears to fill my eyes. "I don't know what I'd do without you." As we drove through the empty streets, Jake kept up a steady stream of comforting chatter about the evacuation plan, the route he'd chosen, and how quickly we'd be out of danger. His performance was flawless. No one watching would suspect he was driving his own cousin toward her death. But I wasn't the same trusting girl who'd died 3 days from now. This time, I knew exactly who Jake really was, what he wanted, and how he planned to get it. Most importantly, I knew something Jake didn't. Riverside Bridge wouldn't collapse from earthquake damage. It would collapse because Jake had been systematically weakening its support cables for weeks, using his city access to create the perfect accident that would eliminate his only obstacle to Grandma's fortune. The radio crackled with emergency broadcasts as we drove. "Citizens are advised to use designated evacuation routes. Avoid older infrastructure, including the Riverside Bridge, pending further structural assessment." Jake reached over and switched off the radio. "News media always exaggerates," he said smoothly. "They want to cause panic." I nodded and smiled, playing my part perfectly. But inside, I was calculating every detail of what came next. In my first life, I'd trusted Jake completely right up until the moment he pushed me onto that bridge, and I heard the cable snapping above my head. This time, Jake would be the one crossing Riverside Bridge, and I would be the one standing on solid ground, watching him walk toward the death he'd planned for me. The car pulled into the empty parking area beside the bridge approach, right on schedule. Jake turned to me with that same caring expression I'd fallen for before. "Ready, cousin?" I looked directly into his eyes and smiled. "I have never been more ready for anything in my life." As Jake parked near the bridge approach, I felt the familiar weight of déjà vu. In my previous life, I'd been terrified, clinging to his arm as he guided me toward what I thought was safety. Now, I studied every detail with cold precision. "The bridge looks sturdy enough," I said, testing him. "Are you sure about the route?" Jake's eyes flickered, just for a second, before his mask of concern returned. "Absolutely. I've been monitoring the structural reports for weeks as part of my job. This bridge can handle anything." Another lie. I remembered now how he'd stuttered slightly when he said it the first time, a tell I'd missed in my panic. This time, I caught the micro-expression of satisfaction that crossed his face. He was enjoying this. "Jake," I said softly, "can I ask you something personal?" "Of course, sweetheart. What's on your mind?" "Do you ever think about Grandma's will? About what happens to her money?" His hand tightened almost imperceptibly on the steering wheel. "Why would you bring that up now? We're in the middle of an emergency." I've been having strange dreams about dying, and I realized I never really thought about what would happen to everything if something happened to me. I turned to face him directly. "You'd inherit everything, wouldn't you? Since you're my next of kin?" Jake's performance was flawless. His face crumpled with what looked like genuine pain. "Lily, don't talk like that. Nothing's going to happen to you. I won't let it." "But if it did, it won't." His voice was firm, final. "I promise you, cousin, I will personally make sure you get across this bridge safely." The irony was delicious. He was promising to ensure my death while pretending to protect my life. "Thank you," I whispered. I trust you completely." We sat in silence for a moment, both of us looking at Riverside Bridge stretching across the dark water below. In the distance, I could see the first hints of dawn breaking over the mountains. The same mountains that would shake in exactly 18 hours, triggering the landslide that would create the perfect cover for Jake's planned accident. But I had learned something crucial in my research after my rebirth. Jake hadn't been content to wait for natural disaster. He'd been preparing for months, using his city planning access to gradually weaken specific support cables. The earthquake would simply be his alibi. "Jake," I said suddenly, "I need to use the restroom before we cross. Is there a gas station nearby?" His jaw clenched. We were so close to his goal, and I was creating delays. But he couldn't refuse without seeming suspicious. "There's one about a mile back," he said reluctantly. "But we should hurry, the aftershocks. I'll be quick, I promise." As we drove to the gas station, I sent 3 text messages. The first was to Martin Webb. "File the codicil immediately, emergency situation developing." The second was to my friend Rebecca. "If anything happens to me, investigate Jake. Trust no one else." The third was to the city emergency hotline. "Anonymous tip, check Riverside Bridge cables for sabotage. Focus on support points 7 and 12. When we returned to the bridge 20 minutes later, Jake was visibly agitated. He kept checking his watch and scanning the horizon for signs of seismic activity. "Ready now?" he asked, his smile stretched thin. "Almost." I stepped out of the car and walked to the bridge entrance, Jake following closely behind. This was the exact spot where, in my previous life, he'd insisted we continue on foot because his car was making strange noises. Right on cue, Jake stopped and frowned at his engine. "That's weird. Do you hear that clicking sound?" I pretended to listen. "Sort of. I think we should walk from here just to be safe. The bridge isn't that long, and we don't want to risk the car breaking down in the middle." Perfect. Just like before, he was setting up the scenario where we'd be on foot when the cable snapped, making it look like an accident rather than sabotage. "Okay," I agreed. "But, Jake, I'm really scared. Will you go first, just to make sure it's safe?" Something flickered in his eyes. Surprise, perhaps, that I was asking him to take the lead. In our first life, he'd pushed me ahead, claiming he needed to watch my back for falling debris. "Are you sure?" he asked carefully. "I thought I should stay behind you, in case—" "Please," I interrupted, letting my voice crack. "I know it's selfish, but seeing you walk safely ahead would make me feel so much better. You're stronger than me. If the bridge can hold you, it can hold me." Jake paused, clearly recalculating. He'd planned for me to be in front when the cables gave way, ensuring I'd fall while he'd have time to step back to safety. But refusing my request would seem strange, and he couldn't afford to make me suspicious now. "Of course," he said finally. "Anything to make you feel safer." We approached the bridge entrance together. The old steel structure loomed above us, its cables humming slightly in the morning wind. I knew that beneath our feet, Jake had spent weeks carefully filing through specific support points, leaving just enough integrity to hold under normal conditions, but not enough to survive any sudden stress. What Jake didn't know was that my anonymous tip had already been received. City emergency services were en route to inspect the bridge, but they wouldn't arrive for another 30 minutes. Just enough time for what needed to happen. "You know," I said conversationally as we reached the bridge deck, "I've been thinking about our family a lot lately. About loyalty. About who we can really trust." Jake stepped onto the bridge first, just as I'd requested. "Family is everything, Lily. That's why I'm here. That's why I'll always protect you. Even if it meant sacrificing yourself." He turned back to look at me, and for just a moment his mask slipped. I saw the calculation in his eyes, the cold assessment of risk versus reward. What kind of question is that? The kind that reveals who people really are. Jake had walked about 20 feet onto the bridge when his phone buzzed. He pulled it out, frowning. Emergency services? Why would they be calling me? Maybe you should answer it, I suggested, staying carefully at the bridge entrance. Jake Morrison speaking, he said into the phone. I could hear the voice on the other end, urgent and official. Sir, we need you to evacuate Riverside Bridge immediately. We've received reports of structural sabotage. Do not, I repeat, do not put any additional weight on that bridge. The colour drained from Jake's face. He looked down at his feet, then back at me, understanding dawning in his eyes. You knew, he whispered. I knew, I confirmed. I knew about the inheritance. I knew about the cables you weakened. I knew about your plan to push me onto this bridge and watch me die while you stood safely behind, pretending to be the grieving cousin who tried to save me. Jake's breathing became rapid, panicked. He was trapped 20 feet out on a bridge he'd sabotaged, afraid to move forward or backward. How? He asked. Let's just say I had a very enlightening dream. I pulled out my phone and held it up. The police are already on their way to examine your handiwork. The insurance investigators will find it interesting that you had access to the bridge maintenance records, and my lawyer has already filed a new will, leaving everything to charity. Lily, you have to help me, Jake pleaded, his facade completely crumbling. I can't move. If I put more weight on the wrong section, you'll fall to your death, I finished calmly, just like you planned for me. Please, I'm sorry. I was desperate, in debt. You needed to murder your own cousin for money. I shook my head. There's no coming back from that, Jake. The bridge began to vibrate slightly under his feet. Whether from his panicked movements or the structural weakness he'd created, I couldn't tell. Jake's eyes went wide with terror. Lily, please, I'm begging you. I stood silently at the bridge entrance, watching him realize that his own greed had trapped him in the death he'd designed for me. The morning sun was rising behind him, casting his shadow long across the bridge deck toward my feet. You know what the difference is between us, Jake? I said quietly. I would have shared Grandma's inheritance with you if you'd just asked, but you chose murder instead. The sound of sirens grew louder in the distance. Emergency services, police, probably fire rescue too. They'd arrived just in time to witness the collapse of a bridge that had been sabotaged by the very man now trapped on it. Jake took a desperate step toward me, and I heard the ominous groan of stressed metal. Don't move, I advised. You designed this trap perfectly. It would be a shame to waste your craftsmanship. The sirens grew louder as Jake stood frozen on the bridge, 20 feet from safety and a lifetime away from the inheritance he'd killed for. His designer jacket fluttered in the morning breeze, and I noticed his hands shaking as he gripped his phone. The police will be here in minutes, I said conversationally. They'll want to know why the city planning department's star employee has been making unauthorized visits to this bridge for the past 6 weeks. They'll find your fingerprints on the cable housings, Jake, and the security footage from the maintenance access points. You're bluffing, he said, but his voice cracked. There's no way you could know all that. I smiled. I know you used your master key card 17 times to access restricted areas. I know you told your supervisor you were conducting routine structural assessments while you were actually weakening support cables 7 and 12. I know you practiced this exact scenario 3 times, timing how long it would take for help to arrive after a tragic accident. Jake's face went white. How could you possibly? Because I lived through it once already. The words hung in the air between us. I died on this bridge, Jake. I felt the cables snap. I fell into that freezing water while you stood exactly where I'm standing now. watching me drown and calculating how long to wait before calling for help to make it look good. That's impossible, he whispered. Is it? Then how do I know about the insurance policies you took out on me last month? The ones where you're the beneficiary? How do I know you've been researching bridge collapse accidents for weeks, saving articles about tragic family members lost in natural disasters? Jake tried to take a step backward, but the bridge groaned ominously. He froze again, terror replacing calculation in his eyes. You see, cousin, I continued, in my first life, I trusted you completely. Right up until the moment you put your hands on my back and shoved me forward onto the weakest section of the bridge. You told me to run for safety just as the cable snapped, but this time I remember everything. The first police car rounded the corner, followed by a fire truck and an ambulance. Jake's eyes darted between the approaching vehicles and my calm face. Lily, please, he begged. We can work this out. I'll split the money with you, 50-50. I'll confess to the insurance fraud, but please help me get off this bridge. Split the money? I laughed, and the sound was cold even to my own ears. Jake, I changed my will this morning. There is no money. Every penny goes to the Riverside Animal Shelter. You've been planning murder for charity donations. His face contorted with rage. You bitch! Do you have any idea what I've sacrificed for this? The planning, the risk, the attempted murder of your own family? I finished. Yes, I have a very clear idea. The emergency vehicles pulled up behind me, and I heard car doors slamming. Heavy footsteps approached, and I turned to see Lieutenant Morrison, no relation to Jake despite the shared name, jogging toward us with two other officers. Ma'am, step away from the bridge, Lieutenant Morrison called. We received a report about structural sabotage. That's correct, I said, moving further back. My cousin Jake is currently standing on the section he deliberately weakened. He's been sabotaging this bridge for weeks as part of a murder plot. Jake's voice rose to a desperate shout. She's lying! I'm the victim here! She lured me onto this bridge. It's a trap! Lieutenant Morrison looked between us, then at Jake stranded on the bridge. Sir, do you work for the city planning department? Yes, but... And do you have access to bridge maintenance records and facilities? Jake's mouth opened and closed like a fish. I can explain... We'll need those explanations downtown, the lieutenant said grimly. He turned to the fire chief who'd just arrived. Can we get him off there safely? And the fire chief studied the bridge structure with experienced eyes. Not easily. If he's been cutting cables, any additional weight or vibration could trigger a collapse. We'll need to bring in specialized equipment. How long will that take? Jake called out, panic rising in his voice. Could be hours, the fire chief replied honestly. I watched Jake process this information. Hours standing on a bridge he'd sabotaged, knowing that any wrong move could send him plummeting to the death he'd planned for me. The poetic justice was almost too perfect. Miss Chen, Lieutenant Morrison said, consulting his notepad. You called in the anonymous tip about the sabotage? I did. I discovered my cousin's plan to murder me for my inheritance. I have documentation proving he's been accessing this bridge illegally and researching similar accidents for weeks. These are serious accusations. And I have serious evidence. I pulled out my phone and showed him the screenshots I'd taken. Bank records showing he's drowning in gambling debt. Insurance policies he took out on my life without my knowledge. Browser history from his work computer showing searches for bridge cable failure, inheritance law, and accidental death investigations. Jake's voice carried across the morning air, shrill with desperation. She's setting me up. This is all fabricated. Lieutenant Morrison studied my evidence, his expression growing darker. Ma'am, how did you obtain your cousin's private records and browser history? I met his eyes steadily. Let's just say I had a very revealing dream about what my dear cousin had planned for me. Sometimes the universe provides exactly the evidence we need to protect ourselves. The lieutenant looked skeptical, but before he could respond, Jake made a crucial mistake. Whether from panic or rage, he tried to rush toward us, forgetting his own sabotage. The sound was unmistakable, the sharp crack of overstressed metal, followed by the groan of failing supports. Jake stopped mid-step, his face a mask of absolute terror as he felt the bridge deck shift beneath his feet. "Don't move!" the fire chief shouted. "Don't even breathe heavily!" But it was too late. Jake's panicked movement had triggered exactly what he'd designed, a cascading failure of the weakened support system. The section of bridge where he stood began to tilt at an alarming angle. "Help me!" Jake screamed, dropping to his knees and clinging to the bridge railing. "Please, I'm sorry for everything." I stood, watching silently as my cousin faced the terror he'd planned for me. The same fear, the same helplessness, the same realization that death was approaching and there was nothing he could do to stop it. "Lily," he cried out one last time, "please, I'm your family." "Family," I repeated quietly, "doesn't try to murder family for money." The bridge section gave a final ominous groan. Jake's eyes met mine across the growing gap, and in that moment, I saw him truly understand what he'd done. Not just the technical sabotage, but the moral collapse that had brought him to this point. The cable snapped with sounds like gunshots, and Jake disappeared into the rushing water below, his scream cut short by the splash. I turned to Lieutenant Morrison, who was staring at the collapsed bridge section in shock. "I believe," I said calmly, "you'll find this was a case of justice served." The rescue divers found Jake's body 3 hours later, tangled in the twisted metal of the bridge section he'd sabotaged. Lieutenant Morrison delivered the news to me as I sat in the police station, calmly answering questions about my cousin's attempted murder plot. "The coroner will rule it accidental death," he said, settling into the chair across from me. "Ironic, considering that's exactly what your cousin was planning for you." "Karma has a sense of humour," I replied. "Miss Chen, I have to ask. Your evidence against your cousin was remarkably comprehensive, almost like you knew exactly what to look for and where to find it." I met his gaze steadily. "Sometimes we get second chances to see people for who they really are, Lieutenant. I chose not to waste mine." The investigation that followed was swift and thorough. Jake's computer revealed months of premeditation, research into bridge engineering, insurance fraud techniques, and inheritance law. His financial records showed mounting gambling debts and desperate attempts to secure loans. The physical evidence at the bridge confirmed deliberate sabotage of the exact cables that had failed. Most damning of all were the insurance policies. 3 separate life insurance policies on me, totaling $4 million, all taken out in the past 2 months with Jake as the sole beneficiary. When investigators questioned the insurance agents, they remembered Jake's specific questions about payouts for accidental deaths during natural disasters. Martin Webb, my lawyer, visited me a week after Jake's death to finalise the paperwork. "The codicil has been properly filed," he said, sliding documents across his desk. "Your entire estate will go to the Riverside Animal Shelter upon your death. Jake Morrison will receive nothing." "Good," I said, "though I suppose it's academic now." "There's something else," Martin continued. "The insurance companies are investigating Jake's policies on your life. Since you're still alive and he died while attempting insurance fraud, they're considering this a criminal matter. You may be entitled to damages." I almost laughed. In trying to kill me for money, Jake had inadvertently made me wealthier. "Let them investigate. I want every detail of his plan exposed." The story made headlines for weeks. "City employee dies in bridge he sabotaged for murder plot." The local news interviewed me extensively, portraying me as the innocent cousin who'd narrowly escaped a calculating killer. I played the role perfectly, grieving, shocked, grateful to be alive. No one suspected that I'd orchestrated Jake's downfall with the precision of someone who'd lived through his betrayal once before. Rebecca, my closest friend, visited me a month later as I was cleaning out Jake's apartment. The landlord had given me access as his next of kin, and I was donating his belongings to charity. "I still can't believe it," she said, helping me pack boxes. "Jake always seemed so protective of you." "People aren't always what they seem," I replied, folding his city planning uniform. "Sometimes the people closest to us are the most dangerous." "That anonymous tip you made probably saved your life. How did you know to suspect him?" I paused, holding one of Jake's work shirts. I had a very vivid nightmare about dying. It felt so real that I started paying attention to things I'd normally overlook. Jake's behaviour, his questions about my inheritance, his sudden interest in emergency evacuation routes. Thank God you trusted your instincts. "Sometimes our subconscious picks up on threats before our conscious mind does," I said. It wasn't technically a lie. As we packed Jake's belongings, I found his personal journal hidden in a shoebox. The entries from the past few months were chilling in their cold calculation. March 15th, Lily mentioned updating her will. "Need to delay this until after the plan is complete." April 2nd, tested bridge access with master key. Security cameras have blind spots near support points 7 and 12. April 20th, insurance agent confirmed accidental death clause. 4 million should cover debts plus provide comfortable future. May 10th, weather service predicts increased seismic activity. Perfect cover for natural disaster scenario. The final entry was dated the day before his death. May 28th. Everything is ready. Tomorrow Lily dies, and I finally get what I deserve. She'll never see it coming. I closed the journal and handed it to Rebecca. "Give this to Lieutenant Morrison. It should be part of the official record." 6 months later, I stood in the memorial garden I'd commissioned for Jake. The stone plaque read, "Jacob Morrison, beloved cousin, in memory of family bonds and the consequences of our choices." The irony wasn't lost on me. Even in death, I was more generous to Jake than he'd ever been to me in life. The insurance settlement had indeed made me wealthy. $8 million in damages and compensation for the trauma and attempted murder. I used half of it to establish the Jake Morrison Foundation for Bridge Safety, ensuring that his legacy would be preventing the kind of accidents he'd tried to create. The other half went into a trust fund for children who'd lost parents to violent crimes. I understood what it meant to lose family to betrayal, even if my family had been the betrayer. As I walked back to my car, I felt my phone buzz with a text from an unknown number. "Thank you for the second chance. Some people deserve justice, and some deserve mercy. You chose wisely." I stared at the message for a long moment. I'd never told anyone about my rebirth, about the supernatural second chance that had allowed me to save my own life and deliver justice to Jake. But somehow, someone knew. I typed back, "Who is this?" The response came immediately. "A friend who ensures balance. Your story is complete, Lily Chen. Live well." I looked around the empty cemetery but saw no one. The message thread showed no history, as if the conversation had never happened. Walking to my car, I realised I didn't care who had given me this gift or why. What mattered was that I'd used it wisely. Jake had chosen greed over love, murder over honesty, betrayal over loyalty. His death was the direct result of his own choices and actions. I had simply ensured that his carefully laid trap caught the right person. As I drove home, I thought about the future Jake had stolen from me in my first life, and the future I'd reclaimed in my second. I was 23 years old, with my whole life ahead of me, free from the family member who'd seen me as nothing more than a source of money. The radio played softly as I pulled into my driveway, the same house Jake had thought he'd inherit along with everything else. I decided to keep it, turning his would-be crime scene into my sanctuary. That evening, I sat on my porch watching the sunset over the mountains. In the distance, I could see the construction crews working on the new Riverside Bridge, a stronger, safer structure that would stand for generations. My phone rang. Martin Wabe's name appeared on the screen. "Lily, I have wonderful news. The insurance settlements have been finalised, and there's an unexpected inheritance from a distant relative you never knew about. Apparently, your grandmother had a sister who passed away recently and left you everything. Another $3 million. I smiled, watching the last light fade behind the mountains. "That's incredible, Martin. What was her name?" "Curious thing, her name was also Lily. Lily Chen Morrison. The lawyers said she'd been watching over you your whole life, making sure you'd be provided for if anything ever happened." The name Morrison. Jake's family name. But Jake had been Uncle Richard's son, and I'd never heard of any other Morrison relatives. "Martin," I said slowly, "are you sure about this inheritance?" "Completely verified. She even left a note specifically for you. It says, 'For my dear great-niece Lily, may you always choose justice over revenge, and may your second chances be used wisely.'" I hung up the phone and stared at the darkening sky. Another mysterious message, another impossible gift. Someone or something was ensuring that my new life would be everything my first life should have been. Jake had died trying to steal money that was never really meant for him anyway. The universe, it seemed, had its own accounting system. I raised my glass of wine to the evening sky. "Thank you," I said quietly, "for the second chance, for the justice, and for teaching me that sometimes the best revenge is simply living well." The stars appeared one by one, and I sat in perfect peace, knowing that my story had reached its true ending. Jake's betrayal had died with him on that bridge. What remained was my life, my real life, stretching out before me like a road with no limits. This time, I would choose every step of the journey myself.